Hello and welcome to another Hand Drink Solo wine info video where we review curious wines for curious minds. And today we're engaging with a rather unhelpful habit that winemakers employ, often with the best of intentions, but which usually end up undermining their really rather quite hard work. Now what happens is a winemaker will make what they deem to be a flagship wine, and perhaps it's from a single vineyard, perhaps the yields are very low and the vines are very old. And when this happens, the winemaker takes on a certain tone of voice. There's breathless whispers of adoration and kind of the emotional equivalent of cathedral lighting. But then that winemaker will make another wine, and perhaps this one is not a single vineyard, it's from a bunch of different vineyards, and so he has to collect all the fruit and he has to bring it back to the cellar, and it's not native yeast, he inoculates with some yeast, and because he's inoculated, everything goes fairly smoothly. There are no heroics, but it should be noted that it took far more hard work to produce this particular wine because he had to collect the fruit and then add the yeast himself. It wasn't just sitting on the skins of the grapes. And then he had to blend the parcels afterwards before bottling. And yet when this wine comes out onto the market, the winemaker's tone of voice changes, becomes a lot more casual. And he might say something like, oh, this one, yes, that's my Bry wine, or poolside quaffer if you prefer. You can just knock that back. And whenever a winemaker says that to me, I have to ask why. Why does he feel like he needs to ration his enthusiasm, as if being excited about both wines for different reasons will somehow result in stealing some of the light from the oh-so-delicate flagship bottling? Because there's a rather gross contradiction in that whole scenario, which I've already hinted at, and that is that usually with the flagship, distinct, single-site, single-vineyard wines, winemakers profess to do very little because they don't want to be involved. They just want to let the vineyards speak. They just guide the fruit through the fermentation process, almost as if this was some sort of gargantuan viticultural version of the Olympic sport of curling. You just gesture at the grapes, you don't actually touch them. Now, if that is true, then why is the enthusiasm reserved for that wine as opposed to the wine where the winemaker, in his expertise and with all his experience and genius, did quite a lot of hard work to produce a really rather delicious drink? What exactly are the factors that give us permission to take a wine seriously? Is it vineyard site, or perhaps a particular cultivar, or perhaps the scarcity of grapes due to a low yield or very old vines? Because I can guarantee you that whatever factor you choose to hang your hat on for which wines are serious and which are not, I will be able to show you wines that are both poolside quaffers and flagship wines that embody those same conditions. One might say, well, no, you see, if a vine really struggles and it's a really marginal site, then that is what makes a wine serious. But by that definition, if you have a really experienced, smart, passionate viticulturalist who pays attention to every single vine in his vineyard and makes sure that every vine is healthy and in balance, all he'll ever produce is poolside quaffers. Or perhaps if you decide that, yes, as we said earlier, it must be a single vineyard, well then, by definition, you cannot have any serious blends. And as we know, some of the most expensive wines in the world are blends. An added problem with the single vineyard theory is that it would also mean that there would be zero global brands of any repute, because by definition, a single vineyard can only really produce a couple of thousand bottles before the vines are at their capacity, and you can't build a global brand out of a few thousand bottles. And finally, one might say, well, Han, don't be so naive. Of course, it is availability as a result of terroir, and you might refer to the most expensive Pinot Noirs from Burgundy. But if really it is terroir that we're talking about, then why is it that Champagne never got any cheaper when they magically enlarged their appellation boundaries? Should we be taking Champagne less seriously than we did 40 years ago? I guess the bigger question we're asking is, what exactly are we talking about when we describe a serious wine and an unserious wine? Now, at this point, you may say, Han, what on earth are you ranting about? And I guess what I'm ranting about is today's wine of the day, which is the Blacksmith Barebones Cinsault, made by the rather eclectic and incredibly talented winemaker Tremaine Smith, using fruit from the farm of Primo. And Primo is in the wine of origin Paarl area. And that means that this wine is yet another nail in the coffin of the idea that Paarl is either too hot a region or too bulk-oriented an industry to produce truly premium wines. But if you're still a Paarl naysayer, then do me a favor and why don't you track down these couple of wines that I think might might change your mind. I would look out for wines like the Nederburg R163 Cabernet Sauvignon, or the Ridgeback Cabernet Sauvignon, or the Ridgeback Cabernet Franc for that matter. Then there's the Villefonte Series C Bordeaux blend, Fairview's Petit Syrah, there's the Babylon Store and Nebuchadnezzar Red blend, or if you prefer white wines, try the Père de Bar Dryland Collection Chenin Blancs. I mean, I really could keep going, but that should be more than enough evidence to prove my point. In the meantime, let's get back to the wine of the day, which you might have guessed by now has been described as a braai wine. And I find this disrespectful for two reasons. First of all, it's disrespectful to the art of braaiing, or barbecuing if you're not from South Africa, as if cooking your food over an open flame means you don't need absolutely exquisite wines to serve with that food. Secondly, it limits the setting that wine lovers can serve that particular wine. And once we get into the glass, I'm sure you'll see that that is an absolute mistake. And that's exactly what we're going to do now. Now, when we give this guy a sniff, well, I mean, look, if we thought we were going to get a wine that obeys the rules, you've got another thing coming. The first thing that leaps out the glass at you is this really fresh cut, quite vivid sense of strawberry fruit. But then alongside that is the slightly more candied, sherbety crackle of toffee apple casing. Not the apple beneath it, but rather that beautiful, thin, translucent red candy coating. And then it shifts a little bit. There's another layer that emerges. And that is a kind of floral spice, but not like lavender floral spice, more like a hint of rosewater and pepper together, perhaps kind of like a Madagascan pink peppercorn that floats in between the candy and the strawberry fruit notes. And then there's another layer beneath that, which is almost like those old vintage musk pink sweets that you used to eat as a kid. So this wine definitely has playful notes, but there's enough layers for it to be both playful, but not simple, cheeky, but not unserious. So let's get onto the palate and see what it has for us. Well, when we taste wines, or when you're doing a wine course and you're learning the correct things to say, you generally are taught to group red wines with red fruits for the most part. So if you have a red wine, no one is going to scream at you for saying things like cherry and plum and raspberry and blackberries and blackcurrant. And these are all safe and predictable. But this wine absolutely refuses to take part in that game, because the first thing that jumps out actually is this beautiful, tart, but quite intense blood orange. It's very citrus up front. Especially if served slightly chilled. You've got the bitterness, you've got the zest, you've got that juicy, tart feeling in your mouth. Now, as it warms in your mouth, then it starts to shift over into slightly redder elements of bright tart cherries, touches of raspberry, but then very much strawberry. And strawberry is a fruit that I don't get often on red wines, but with wines like Cinsault and Grenache, I find that that is a fruit that pops up more often. But the rule breaking doesn't stop there, because towards the end, there's kind of an aromatic puff, which I struggled to place for a little bit until I realized it's the kind of aftertaste you get when you bite a red apple, like a Star King apple, that slightly sweeter, almost floral red note that comes from eating an apple, which we often associated with not red fruit. So you have citrus up front. You do have some more traditional cherry and strawberry and raspberry elements, a little bit of sherbety candy notes in it. And then you've got this puff of apple fruit on this wine. It really is supremely layered. And if you were to make the mistake of thinking that you should just toss this back after your Sunday morning jog, well, I think you'd be missing an element or two that is in the glass there just for you to appreciate. One thing that this wine is not is flabby or jammy. And really, it's about tension and lift. And Cinsault, which is not a cultivar that naturally has loads of acid, can sometimes feel like fruit juice. But this has that tension, the citrus, the apple skin, the strawberry in the middle, and the sherbety candy element. And I guess anyone who says that Cinsault can't be taken seriously is kind of like people who say that stand-up comedy has nothing serious to say about society. It's like you just haven't been listening carefully enough. So that's all we have time for today. But I'm going to leave you links to 2 videos. They could have been about Cinsault, but actually I'd rather talk about things that are going on in Paarl, and that's what you'll find. And until next time, stay curious and always drink niche.